Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly on our topics this week. Should term limits be limited? There's no term limit for Justice Kavanaugh. And which term is accurate, blue wave or red? Plus roast and toast. But we're going to start with our Newsmaker segment and focus on the upcoming November election in Jackson County. 7 proposed charter amendments ranging from term limits to limits on the county executive's powers are on the ballot. Here to discuss them with us is former County Executive Catherine Shields, now a member of the Kansas City, Missouri City Council. Catherine, it's great to see you again. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
I would guess there is no one who knows more about county government in Jackson County than you. You served, what, 2 terms?
No, 3 terms.
3 terms as the county
yeah.
executive. Based on your experience, does the county government need restructuring of some sort?
Actually, I don't think it does. If you look at the totality of these charter changes, they're really a power grab and a salary increase disguised as term limits. I truly think the term limits are thrown in to get public support, but the real meat of it is what's happening elsewhere. In terms of the salary increase, which is the easiest to understand, when I was county executive by ordinance for the next term after I was no longer in office, we passed an ordinance that linked the salary of all of your elected officials to the salary of circuit court judges, which go up from time to time and is handled by the state legislature. So totally out of the sphere of county machinations. And the change now, for example, the county legislature under our ordinance was set at 1/4 of a circuit court judge salary. They're increasing that to 1/3. The county executive, the prosecutor, and the sheriff go from being equivalent to a circuit court judge to being equivalent to the Court of Appeals.
And their powers would be changed. The county executive would have less power, the sheriff would have more,
yes.
And the prosecutor would have more, I think.
That's exactly right. But let's talk about term limits, and then we'll talk about the powers. The term limits language is written very interestingly. In the city, and let me put my glasses on so I can read you.
I didn't think you needed them.
The city term limits, well, I don't have it here. Basically, city says if you've been elected twice, you can't be elected for a 3rd time,
right.
Consecutive row. But the counties say you can't serve more than 2 full terms, which I think leaves very much open the possibility that
someone comes in at the middle of a term,
right,
you could finish that term and go beyond.
Or how about if 30 days before the end of your 2nd term you resign? No. I think there's no real, and if you look at another provision here, which deals with qualifications for running for any county office, this charter change would disqualify anyone who held a local, state, or federal position from they couldn't even file for a county position. For example, when I was on the city council before and ran for county executive, if this provision had been in place, I would have had to resign my seat on the city council to even run for the position.
If I understand correctly, even if the charter amendments were approved, the county executive, Frank White, has already named a commission to review the changes in the county, and the ones that are passed or presumably passed would be invalidated. Is that correct?
No, if they're approved by the voters, they're in place. Now, you could have a subsequent election for the voters to rescind or change them, but no, once the voters vote on them, that's the county charter.
Are there any of the 7 that you think would be appropriate for voters to pass?
I actually think I am not impressed with any of them. You have, for example, a provision that takes the power to run the jail from the county executive to the sheriff. given the situation of the jail, I can understand why that's appealing. But the issues with the jail are not going to be solved by who's over it, whether it's the county executive or the sheriff. It's going to be, they're going to be solved by having a concentrated focus on how to address all these problems.
Let me get you to go very quickly to city government.
Okay.
Jason Kander's pulled out of the mayor's race. Anybody in the lead now that you know of? Who
no, I think it's pretty much a toss-up now.
And how about you? You've run before.
I'm out.
You're out of the mayor's race.
I am very happy.
Running for a second term as city council, 4th district at large.
4th district at large. I'm very happy to be doing that, and if the voters allow me, I would like to do it for another 4 years.
Catherine, it's great to see you again. Thanks, as always, for coming in, being with us.
Thank you.
That is Kansas City Councilwoman and former county executive Catherine Shields. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus. Jason Grill is the founder of J Grill Media and a senior advisor at Paris Communications. Steve Rose is a Johnson County civic leader and a Kansas City Star columnist. John Stevens is the newly named president and CEO of Port KC, formerly known as the Port Authority. And attorney Laura McConwell was formerly known as mayor of Mission, Kansas. Congratulations, John. Welcome to everybody. Thanks for coming in today. Kansas City Star's Influencer series recently looked at the question of term limits in Missouri and if their imposition 26 years ago has worked, improved state government, made legislators more responsive to the public will. According to the Star, the answer is a resounding no. Most influencers told the paper term limits contribute to political gridlock, increase the influence of lobbyists, political consultants, and bureaucrats, and create greater incentive for lawmakers to seek out lobbying jobs as they approach the end of their time in office. So, Jason, you were a former state rep in Missouri, and you're part of this influencer program. What is your view on term limits in Missouri?
I tend to agree with the sentiments of all of the influencers. They do kind of change the game in Missouri politics, especially in the state legislature. I think there's got to be a middle ground. I don't agree with the 8 years. I think it should be 12 years in the House and 12 years in the Senate. I think that's a good amount of time. If you're in Jeff City for 24 years, that's enough. Or 12 years in either body. I think 8 years is too short. I think there is a lack of institutional knowledge. The lobbyists, the bureaucrats, and the people that have been there for years kind of control the building. They control how legislation gets started. And I think that's because when you get down there, you have no idea what you're doing for the first 2 years, basically.
Steve, what's the purpose of term limits? Why even?
I don't know. I think it's people who are afraid of themselves, that they won't vote right when the time comes to either throw somebody out or keep somebody in. The founding fathers didn't see a need to put it in, except for we added, of course, presidential term limits in both state and federal governments. But looking at it from a Kansas point of view, we don't have the term limits except at the gubernatorial level. And I think it works just fine. You have people who've been there a very long time. You have people who've been there a long time who got thrown out because you didn't agree with where they were heading. So I trust the people. I trust democracy. I trust people's judgment and knowledge to understand and know who to get in and who not to get in.
John, we just heard Catherine Shields, former county executive, say she's against the idea of term limits in Jackson County, especially the way they're written for the November election. Do you have that same reaction?
I do. I think term limits in general, much as Jason and Steve alluded to, and I think that goes for Jackson County as well, that term limits as written would not give the elected officials enough time to really get into the heart of the matter and work on the issues that matter to the voters. They need more time if the voters are willing to give them more time as their performance is based. I do think that longer term, 12-year, 16-year type term limits, I do think given on a national scale some of the different districts and the way the districts are formed and the way the electorate works, I do think a long-term term limit sort of limitations are something that probably is good, especially at the state level.
So, Laura, you were mayor, what, 3 times in Mission for how many terms? How many years for each term?
I was a little over 12 years as mayor.
Were there term limits?
There were not term limits.
Did you run again and not win, or what happened?
No, I chose not to run. I thought it was time for me to do other things and for others to come in and pick up the torch and carry that. I agree with Steve. I'm not a big fan of term limits. If in Missouri, I think 8 years is way too short, and I think it's crazy because I do think it's difficult to develop a lot of the relationships so that you can create those good, longer, harder legislation, because really that's what we're down to. I mean, everybody can do the feel-good stuff with the proclamations and this and that, but some of the harder stuff, it just takes longer to work through because you've got to go back and work with your constituency.
Well, Jason brought up this point, and maybe you can talk more about it, this idea of institutional knowledge that is lost when people are there for a relatively short time and then move on and new people come in.
Well, I agree, because I think that the paid, if you're going to call them the bureaucrats, the paid staff, the people that are always there, when you have an 8-year term limit, to me, it gives those folks, a whole lot of unelected people, a whole lot of power, because they figure if they don't like what the elected's been elected to do, they can wait that person out because they're going to get term limited even if they keep getting elected.
We see that in the federal government, don't we?
Yes, yes, and that's my concern. I think with a lot of the bureaucracies, the agencies, those unelected people have so much power that I don't think the electorate really understands.
Can I just chime in real quick on Kansas City? I think our term limits for our mayor is kind of not that smart as well. Like, you get to serve 2 terms and you can take off 1 term, then you can come back for a term. Like, if we have a good mayor, let's stick with them.
And I think, one of the old adages in an electoral body is third time's a charm with really affecting change. And a lot of times that is. It really takes multiple cycles for real meaningful legislation and change to get through, and things that matter to voters. And voters that are willing to do that are going to vote the people back in, and they need a little bit longer time to make those work.
Only had 1 3-term mayor in Kansas City, of course now term limits, but that was Dick Berkeley, who served 3 terms. Well, since early this year, Democrats have been talking about and predicting a blue wave election in November that would sweep the party back into control of the U.S. House, maybe the Senate. There's serious talk of a Democrat being elected governor in Kansas, and the 3rd District Kansas congressman, an incumbent Republican, is trailing in some polls to a first-term candidate for any office. But as of late, some polls are beginning to show more GOP support across the country. The analysis seems to be that the battle over the Kavanaugh nomination has re-energized the Republicans, put them back in the battle. We'll get to the Kavanaugh case later, but first this question. Will the November election produce a red wave, a blue wave, or no wave at all? Wave at Laura and ask her to respond first.
Well, I can only speak about where I live, and that's in Johnson County. I know the Democrats are working very, very, very hard, and they're going after all Republicans, and it doesn't matter whether a Republican's moderate or whether a Republican's far right. And I think that's their strategy, whether they'll be successful or not.
They go out and try to change their minds?
Yeah, and some
Have
races,
they visited Steve Rose, do you think?
Well, they may have visited Steve Rose, but I know that they're focusing on Democrats who don't vote and unaffiliated. I think they are starting to reach out to some Republicans, because there are some Republicans that are not really happy about who the choice is for governor, and that does, I think the Democrats feel creates an opportunity. I know they're working hard, but I don't know that it's going to change. It may change a few races, but I don't think it's going to be this wave that all the Republicans are going to be tossed out. I think there may be a few races that Democrats win, but yeah.
John, same question. Blue wave, red wave, no wave?
I think maybe a small wave. I think what you're going to see.
Blue?
Probably leaning blue nationally. I think history sets that up for that. But I think it's all going to come down to turnout. And voter registrations are up, but who knows if those people are going to show up in November, and where they're going to show up, what districts they're going to show up in, what states they're going to show up in. I think if there's any wave at all, it'll be a blue wave, but I don't think we're going to see this massive shift across the country and locally that a lot of people are predicting.
Well, Steve Rose, we've talked about you quite a bit the last few weeks about some of the columns you've written. You are a self-proclaimed Republican. Is that fair to say?
Well, I've been spending some time
years gone by.
I've been spending some time thinking about that, and I'm not going to spend. This is not one of the topics of the day here on this show.
It will
but
be if I wanted to.
I have written a column for this weekend in which I've reflected on that. I've talked to the former Governor Bill Graves and former Senator Nancy Kassebaum, both of whom Republicans endorsed a Democrat for governor, and sort of just spent several hours actually talking about are we still Republicans or not? And I'll just leave you with that. I will say, because it's more complicated than we have time for, if you read my column this weekend, you'll see that I've reflected on it, and I'm not going to sit here and say, at this particular time, with this particular president in particular, that I can say that I am a full-fledged Republican.
We read your column every weekend, Steve, and let me ask you, do you think it's going to be a blue wave in November or a red wave or
let me
no
speak
wave?
about Kansas. You have three races. You have the 3rd District race for Congress.
And you've come out and criticized Yoder, but didn't say you were voting for his Democratic opponent.
You're asking me now who's going to win, not who do I want to win.
No.
You have the 3rd District, you have the 2nd District congressional race, which is also very important, and you have the gubernatorial race. And they're all three right now in polling within a point or two of each other. So, I mean, you could flip a coin almost. But if I had to and somebody said you have to say which way you think it'll go, I would say it'll end up being more red than blue in Kansas.
I think you're going to have
more Republican than Democrat.
I think you're going to nationally have more of a blue wave. It's the best numbers for Democrats since 2006. The gender gap's like 35 points now, and it's leaning Democrats. So I think you're going to see the Democrats take the House back.
But there have been some recent polls that show greater strength.
They're all over the place, but there are some newer polls that are showing a big gender gap. I think you will see a blue wave as far as the House.
Yes.
Democrats will take the House back.
I agree with that.
I agree with that completely.
So who knows what happens after that? Maybe it's not 2006 blue wave, but I think you're going to see more of a blue wave than a red wave.
This possible change, this possible blue wave rise of Democrats, is that Trump's fault?
Well, I wouldn't say it's Trump's fault.
Is it because of him?
I think he certainly agitated and activated a base that since the first Obama campaign had really fallen into the background and really hadn't been engaged.
Well, I also see that the Republicans have the presidency and they have both houses.
Right.
And so the Democrats don't have anything to lose on kind of going, Katie bar the door moving forward. And so the Republicans are in a power position. And I think historically, when you're in that power position, like king of the hill, somebody's always trying to get knock you down.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
All right. Despite the advice of the Kansas City Star, the U.S. Senate went ahead and confirmed the nomination of D.C. Appeals Court Judge Brett Kavanaugh to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. I thought that was kind of funny, despite the advice of the Senate. The vote was a narrow one, mostly across party lines, 50-48. One Democrat, Joe Manchin, voted yes. One Republican, Lisa Murkowski, voted no. The Kavanaugh nomination sparked massive controversies across the country over uncorroborated allegations that Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted young women during his high school and college years. Kavanaugh denied all of the claims. The protests that lined the streets of Washington last weekend have now ended. But does the battle rage on? Steve Rose.
I think the damage has been done to the Democratic Party for what they did. I believe personally that this Dr. Rose was a victim of sexual assault. I believe it was Brett Kavanaugh. I think she knew the guy who was on top of her, and so I don't sit here and say that it happened, but it wasn't him. As far as a strategy is concerned, waiting all those weeks to bring it up and then bringing it up at the last minute and have the case being something that happened back in high school has blown up, and I think there's been among independents, if you look at the polling, the independents by far think that this was a bad deal, that he got a bad deal, that the whole thing was a bad deal and shouldn't have been brought up and he shouldn't be held responsible and all those things. It could turn the tide in a lot of races against people who otherwise would have voted Democratic.
It may have been the thing that seems to have re-energized the Republican Party. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say, and the independents. I think it energized
All right,
both.
Lisa is the only female on the panel and will be criticized, or Laura, as the only female on the panel and will be criticized for only having one, so I apologize in advance.
I can hold my
Maybe you
own.
can answer it twice as long as anybody.
There you go.
As an attorney, as female on the panel, your reaction to all this, the Kavanaugh nomination and all the problems?
Well, there are a lot of things that I think being an attorney is, when you look at the Supreme Court, they're primarily made up of people who've attended Yale and Harvard law schools. And so there are a whole lot of other awesome law schools in the country on people that they can nominate. I'm sure that Judge Kavanaugh, or Justice Kavanaugh, will be a good legal mind. We've had other legal minds going on. I remember when I was in law school, when Robert Bork was nominated, and some of those other nominations, and I can remember some of my law school professors who felt our country was going to go to hell in a handbasket because a number of Reagan's nominees were appointed, and that didn't happen. I guess I have more faith in the system and the policy of it. With regard to Dr. Ford, my heart hurts for her. I agree with Steve. I think this was a last-minute political stunt. I don't think it did her any good. It clearly didn't do the process any good to wait and discuss that in the end, particularly since she didn't want everything to be public. But I think we still need to talk about sexual harassment in our country, and I think it's also important. A law school professor of mine, Jack Balkin, wrote an op-ed about he didn't think Kavanaugh should be confirmed simply because he thought everyone now has their eyes on this confirmation, and that young men in that high school, college age group would be watching how their actions could affect them later in life. And I think he makes an important point.
His presumed actions, we don't
Well,
know
his
for sure. I mean,
we don't know.
He's been convicted of nothing. He's been accused of various crimes.
He had a lot of fun. A lot of us went to high school with Catholic prep school boys, and they're a lot of fun to be around.
Steve, were you one of those?
If he didn't, I will say I will give him the benefit of the doubt and say he probably doesn't remember. I think it was fairly well established that he was a very heavy drinker, and I think we know that. And once you know that, then other things can emanate from that particular.
It doesn't excuse his actions.
It doesn't excuse it.
We don't know what his actions were.
Or about his
Right.
temperament.
I think his temperament was based on the kinds of criticisms he was
But I'm saying,
receiving.
had he been a little
never
more...
been chewed out by a federal court judge. I mean, I have seen federal court judges who do not have great temperament, and they've moved on up to higher, Court of Appeals and on up. So, I'm not going to.
Final question. We got to move on here and get things done. Am I wrong in remembering a time, Steve, when a president would appoint someone to the Supreme Court, and if the Bar Association said that person was in the mainstream of legal jurisprudence, that the Senate would generally vote for that person across both parties?
In a bipartisan way.
Yes.
Absolutely. That was the norm for a very long time. Bork was sort of the first of the end of that particular era, but if you take that out, it's been
Kavanaugh's with Merrick Garland too. What, 95% of the time?
Exactly.
On the federal court.
All right, make sure we got time for everybody.
Which I think that was wrong too.
We are going to head now for the soapbox for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckheads have 30 seconds each to defend, upend, or pretend. And we're going to start with Jason.
I want to toast Jason Kander for his statement he put out and taking care of himself and his family. I've known him for many years, served with him in the legislature. I've had a chance to text with him since then and talk to him. It wasn't easy to do that when you're the front runner in the race. You raise the most money. You have the most name ID of anyone to step out and to take care of yourself. Kudos to him for doing that, and I hope and wish him well, and hopefully he'll get back involved in politics down the road.
Very quickly, let me ask you something. Do you think he'll run for an office down the road?
I don't think he's going to be done with politics. I really don't. I think at some point he'll join back into the race.
Laura.
So I'm going to toast our Congressman Kevin Yoder. I'm the president-elect of Johnson County Bar Association, and every year, as long as I've been a practicing attorney, we've had forums for our congressional candidates. And when the House leadership canceled the votes through the election, he was able to rearrange his schedule to actually appear at our congressional forum. And I'm going to roast his opponent, who decided to be a no-show once she learned that Kevin was going to appear. That's
Sharice Davids, the 3rd District Democratic nominee.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Rose?
I'd like to toast Melania Trump, who basically has stayed away from the profile, the high profile, and has basically said nothing about most anything. This Friday, they're going to air an interview in which it was taped in and when she was in Africa by ABC, with no rules, no preconceived notions about what they were not going to ask. They asked her about infidelity. They asked her about her status with her husband. I don't know what she said, but I'm looking forward Friday night, ABC. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it. She's at least speaking up for herself.
Might be a topic for next week.
Yeah, it could very well be.
Well, red wave, blue wave, no wave, whatever the outcome, I want to give a cautionary toast to all of the newly registered voters. National Voter Registration Day registered 800,000 new voters. The state of Texas is at an all-time high voter registration. Kansas City's high, Nevada, Arizona, on and on and on. Make sure you use that power come November and every election after, local, state, and national.
And finally, you have probably seen this video that got a lot of attention on television the last couple of weeks. It's a horse that broke away from his trainer, ran through a bar in Paris. No one has been able to explain exactly why that happened, but I think, as with many things, there is a political answer. I believe the horse was conducting a Gallup poll. Oh. And that's Ruckus for this week. We're back next Thursday at 7. Now for the Rockettes and the crew, Mike Shannon saying thanks for watching and good night.